Welcome to Books and More, where powerful ideas meet engaging storytelling. Today, we dive into Prisoners of Geography, a remarkable book that reveals how mountains, rivers, oceans, and borders quietly shape global politics. Far from a traditional geopolitical analysis, it offers a clear, compelling look at why nations act the way they do, through the lens of the land beneath them. Whether you're curious about world affairs or simply love learning something new, this book will change the way you see the map and the world around you. Introduction. The story of humanity's wars, power struggles, and national decisions has often been explained through ideology, religion, economics, or the personalities of leaders. But when we look closely, we find a deeper and more persistent truth. Geography is the decisive force, the silent framework upon which every political or military choice is built. Humanity may invent stealth aircraft, the internet, or ultra-precise satellites, yet we still live among mountains, rivers, deserts, and coastlines that have shaped our fate since ancient times. A map does not merely show borders, it reveals the fears, ambitions, and survival instincts of nations. Russia has never felt secure because the vast, flat European plain leaves it exposed to invasion, something it has endured repeatedly throughout history. China, though powerful, is surrounded by deserts, mountains, dense jungles, and vulnerable coastlines, creating a constant sense of unease at its periphery. The United States, in contrast, is blessed with fertile land, a superb river system for commerce, two protective oceans, and peaceful neighbors, advantages that helped it rise swiftly to global dominance. In the Middle East, religion is often cited as the root of conflict, but the map tells a clearer story. A region carved into artificial borders by outside powers, ignoring geography and ethnic reality. Africa likewise suffers hardship not from lack of resources, but from natural barriers. Rivers blocked by waterfalls, few natural harbors, and vast, fragmented terrain that slows development. Japan and South Korea, though disciplined and advanced, exist in a tense neighborhood shaped by their island or peninsular geography. Latin America, rich in resources but divided by the Andes and the Amazon, struggles to unify. And even the Arctic, once dismissed as empty ice, is now becoming a new center of geopolitical competition as the climate changes. Though we live in a digital age, geography has never disappeared from the global chessboard. It continues to influence wars, alliances, and national strategies. This book is written to help readers see the world the way leaders see it, through the map, where the unchanging rules of geography reveal why nations act the way they do and why the future, no matter how fast it evolves, remains anchored to the physical shape of our planet. Chapter 1. Russia. To understand Russia, you must begin with its geography, an immense, almost overwhelming expanse that shapes every instinct, decision, and fear the nation carries. When you look at the map, Russia appears less like a country and more like a continent. 11 time zones, millions of square miles, and borders stretching across Europe and Asia. But what matters most is not its size, but its vulnerability. For all its vastness, Russia lacks natural defenses along its western frontier. There are no towering mountains or deep oceans to protect it. Only the flat, open North European plain, a geographic invitation for invaders. And invaders have come, again and again. From Mongol horsemen to Polish armies, from Napoleon to Hitler, Russia has been shaped by the memory of unexpected forces sweeping toward its heartland. These repeated invasions carved a deep psychological scar that still guides Russian strategy today. To be safe, Russia must push outward. It must create distance, buffer zones, between Moscow and any potential threat. Expansion, therefore, has never been purely about ambition. It has been about survival. Every region absorbed into the Russian sphere throughout history served that purpose. More land meant more warning time, more space to retreat, and more barriers for enemies to cross. The legacy of this thinking continues to define Russia's actions in the modern world. Russia's climate reinforces this mindset. Winters are long and brutal. Agricultural land is limited. Much of the territory is difficult to inhabit or cultivate. When survival itself is a constant challenge, strong centralized control becomes not just a political preference, but an operational necessity. Governing such an enormous and harsh landscape requires authority that can hold distant regions together. This is why Russia has historically leaned towards centralized, often authoritarian systems. Disorder is not simply undesirable, it is existentially dangerous. Geography also explains Russia's persistent hunger for warm water ports. Though Russia has lengthy coastlines, most of them freeze in winter. Without ports that stay open year-round, trade stalls and naval power is constrained. This geographical limitation drives Russia's fixation on places like Crimea and the Black Sea, which offer access to the Mediterranean and beyond. Control of such ports is not merely strategic, it is an escape from isolation. It also explains Russia's continuing influence over the Baltics, Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus. These regions offer terrain and access routes essential for Russian security. Relations with the West are therefore inevitably strained. As NATO expanded eastward after the Cold War, the buffer space Russia relied upon shrank dramatically. What Western nations saw as sovereign countries freely choosing alliances, Moscow saw as a slow encirclement. With each new NATO member on its borders, Russia perceived a growing vulnerability. In this light, Russian actions, whether political pressure, covert operations, or military intervention, reflect a long-standing fear rooted in geography, the fear of being surrounded. Yet Russia is not just defined by threat. The same vast distances that expose it to invasion also help it survive one. No army has ever taken Moscow and held it. The sheer scale of Russia, combined with harsh winters, has defeated even the greatest military powers. This physical resilience has become part of the national identity. The belief that Russia can absorb pressure, retreat if necessary, and eventually outlast any foe. Every Russian strategy, historical or modern, can be traced back to the map. Open plains, frozen seas, extreme climates, and vast interior distances. These elements have molded Russia into a nation that is cautious yet assertive, insecure yet formidable. Understanding Russia means understanding a country constantly balancing between fear and ambition, shaped by a geography that both empowers and endangers it. And so, when you look at Russia's decisions, its insistence on buffer zones, its desire for warm water ports, its distrust of Western alliances, they may seem aggressive or opaque, but through the lens of geography, they reveal a consistent logic. Russia's landscape has shaped its character, and until that landscape changes, Russia's actions will continue to follow the same deeply rooted patterns. Chapter 2. China. To understand China, you must first understand the geography that has shaped its fears, ambitions, and identity for thousands of years. China appears powerful and unified on the map, but beneath that image lies a constant struggle to hold together a vast and diverse land. Its heartland, the fertile North China Plain, has always been the cradle of Chinese civilization, sustained by the Yellow River. Yet this same plain is wide open, vulnerable to invasions that historically came from the north. The Great Wall, in all its length and symbolism, is proof of a nation forever guarding the gateway through which conquerors once poured. Beyond the heartland, China becomes a patchwork of landscapes that complicate unity. To the west lies the Tibetan Plateau, a harsh, elevated world that forms both a shield and a source of instability. Whoever controls Tibet controls the headwaters of Asia's great rivers, which explains why Beijing cannot afford to let it slip away. Farther north stretches Xinjiang, a region of deserts and mountains inhabited by non-Han ethnic groups whose history and identity differ significantly from those of the majority. Maintaining stability in these frontier regions is not simply a political objective, it is a geographical necessity. Fragmentation here would ripple inward and threaten the core. To China's east lies the sea, a paradoxical frontier. For centuries, Chinese dynasties looked inward, viewing the ocean less as an opportunity and more as a vulnerability. Today, with China's economy tied to global trade, the eastern coastline has become its lifeline and its weakness. Almost all of China's imported oil and exported goods pass through narrow maritime routes like the Strait of Malacca. If these were ever blocked, China's economy could collapse. This dependence fuels Beijing's push to build a modern navy, assert control over the South China Sea, and challenge the U.S. presence in the Pacific. The chain of islands stretching from Japan to Taiwan to the Philippines forms a natural barrier, one China feels forced to break through to secure its maritime future. Internally, China faces another challenge: the imbalance between the wealthy, open coastal provinces and the poor, landlocked interior. This divide shapes many of China's major policies. Projects like the Belt and Road Initiative aim to create new trade corridors westward, reducing reliance on vulnerable sea routes and integrating remote provinces into the national economy. These massive investments are not just about influence abroad, they are about stability at home. China's relationship with India is also shaped by geography. The Himalayas form a majestic, forbidding border, but they do not prevent tension. Disputed lines across icy passes have triggered repeated standoffs, each infused with the strategic importance of holding the high ground. Two rising powers, separated by one of the most dramatic natural barriers on Earth, still find themselves close enough for conflict. What emerges from all this is a portrait of a nation that has spent millennia trying to manage its vulnerabilities. China's leaders see threats where others might see simple boundaries. They see internal fractures where others see diversity. Every step China takes, whether tightening control in Xinjiang, building artificial islands, or reaching across continents with new railways, is driven by a geographic logic: to secure the core by stabilizing the edges and to break out of the constraints imposed by land and sea. China's rise is not accidental or sudden. It is the product of centuries of learning to navigate a complex landscape. When you look at China through the map, its decisions become clearer. A nation forever balancing fear and ambition, shaped not only by history and ideology, but by mountains, deserts, rivers, and coastlines that continue to define its destiny. Chapter 3: The United States. To understand the power of the United States, you must first understand the geography that made such power possible. America's rise is not just a story of political ideals or economic ingenuity. It is a story written into the land itself. Unlike Russia with its exposed plains or China with its fragmented interior, the United States possesses one of the most strategically advantageous geographies on Earth. Two vast oceans shield it to the east and west, while Canada and Mexico, neither posing a major military threat, border it to the north and south. This security allows America to focus its resources on growth rather than constant defense. At the nation's core lies its greatest geographic asset: the Mississippi River system. No other country enjoys such an extensive, navigable network of rivers linking fertile farmland to the sea. These waterways make transport cheap and efficient, turning the American interior into an enormous, unified economic engine. Coupled with some of the most productive agricultural land in the world, this has allowed the U.S. to feed its population, support rapid urbanization, and build an industrial base unmatched in scale. The American coastline adds further advantages. Deep water ports along both oceans open the U.S. to global trade, while the Gulf of Mexico, with ports like New Orleans and Houston, connects the heartland to the world. This combination of internal connectivity and external access has enabled the U.S. to project its economic and military power outward with ease. But geography also shapes ambition. As America grew, it understood that controlling the Western Hemisphere was crucial to its security. Hence the Monroe Doctrine, a warning to European powers to stay out of the Americas. Over time, the U.S. intervened repeatedly in Latin America, not always nobly but always strategically, to ensure no rival could gain a foothold near its borders. With its home region secured, the U.S. could then turn its attention across the oceans. America's command of the seas is another cornerstone of its power. Because global trade depends on maritime routes, the U.S. built the world's strongest navy, allowing it to protect shipping lanes and influence events far from its own shores. This naval dominance also means that any challenge to American power must begin by challenging its control of the oceans, a task few nations are prepared to attempt. Internally, the United States benefits from diversity, of climate, of resources, and of population. The East Coast evolved into a financial and cultural hub. The West Coast became the frontier of technology and innovation. The Central States, with their vast agriculture and energy resources, form the economic backbone. This regional balance gives the U.S. unusual resilience. When one sector falters, others can compensate. Yet even with these advantages, America faces challenges. Political polarization, economic inequality, and shifts in global power create internal and external pressures. But geography remains a stabilizing force. The U.S. is hard to invade, easy to feed, and perfectly positioned to engage with the world while remaining secure at home. Seen through the map, the United States becomes less mysterious. Its confidence, its global reach, and even its anxieties all stem from the physical foundations of the nation. America is powerful not only because of its people or institutions, but because its geography gives it room to grow, space to breathe, and the means to shape the world far beyond its shores. Chapter 4. Western Europe. To understand Western Europe, you must begin with the landscape that shaped its fortunes. Unlike Russia's vast exposed plain or China's complex interior, Western Europe is blessed with a geography that encourages connection, trade, and cultural exchange. Its climate is mild, its soil fertile, and its rivers wide and navigable. More importantly, its coastline is deeply indented with bays, estuaries, and natural harbors, perfect gateways for seafaring, commerce, and exploration. This combination of open land and accessible waterways laid the foundation for Europe's rise as a center of innovation, industry, and empire. Yet Europe's geography also ensured that no single empire could dominate for long. The region is dissected by mountain ranges, the Pyrenees, the Alps, the Carpathians, that carve the land into distinct cultural and political units. Rivers link communities, but mountains protect their independence. As a result, Europe developed into a patchwork of competing states: France, Germany, Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, each strong enough to challenge the others, but none strong enough to unite the whole continent by force for more than a brief moment in history. This competition spurred technological progress, exploration of distant lands, and the creation of global empires. The rivalry between France and Germany sits at the heart of Europe's historical struggles. Their shared plain made invasion easy and conflict frequent. The wars fought across this space, from medieval clashes to the devastation of the 20th century, stemmed from the simple geographic fact that the terrain between Paris and Berlin is too open, too flat, and too tempting for armies to cross. The two world wars were not freak accidents of history. They were the culmination of centuries of tension shaped by Europe's physical landscape. But after the Second World War, Western Europe made a revolutionary choice: to turn geography from a source of conflict into a foundation for cooperation. The European Union was born not out of idealism alone, but from a hard-won understanding that trade and shared institutions could succeed where force had failed. By tying their economies together, France and Germany, and the nations around them, transformed borders from front lines into bridges. Britain, an island just across a narrow channel, followed a different path. Protected by the sea, Britain developed a maritime identity and built an empire that spanned the globe. Its geography gave it distance from the continent's wars and allowed it to become a naval superpower. But that same distance created ambiguity about its place in Europe, ultimately contributing to Brexit, a decision rooted as much in geography as in politics. Spain and Portugal, positioned on the Atlantic edge, looked outward early, becoming pioneers of global exploration. The Netherlands, with its river networks and access to the sea, became a trading powerhouse despite its small size. Italy, divided by mountains and shaped by city-states, contributed art, culture, and commerce to the world while struggling to unify politically. Each nation's path reflects its geographical constraints and opportunities. Today, Western Europe faces challenges: migration, terrorism, demographic decline, economic competition from Asia. But geography still offers stability: defensible borders, rich farmland, advanced infrastructure, and a position that anchors them between the Atlantic world and Eurasia. The EU remains an ambitious experiment built on the logic that cooperation is safer than conflict. When viewed through the map, Western Europe's past and present become clear. Its blessings and burdens all flow from the same physical reality, a landscape that fosters both connection and division. And it is in navigating that tension that Western Europe has shaped and continues to shape the world. Chapter 5: Africa. To understand Africa, you must look beyond its immense resources and rich cultures and focus instead on the geography that has shaped its destiny. Africa appears powerful on the map, vast, centrally located, and abundant in minerals, fertile soils, and rivers. Yet beneath this promise lies a landscape that has long restricted unity, slowed development, and constrained the rise of strong nation-states. Geography here is both generous and unforgiving, offering extraordinary wealth while placing immense barriers between the people who inhabit the continent. Africa's coastline is one of its greatest disadvantages. Unlike Europe's deeply indented shores with natural harbors, Africa's coast is smooth and straight for long stretches. Natural deep-water ports are rare, making trade with the outside world historically difficult. This limited early maritime development and kept many African societies isolated from global commerce long after other regions had already interconnected. Rivers, which elsewhere act as vital highways, pose another challenge. The Congo, Niger, and Nile are mighty and impressive, but they are broken by waterfalls and rapids that make long-distance navigation nearly impossible. Instead of linking the continent, these rivers often divide it, forming pockets of civilizations rather than a unified whole. The Sahara Desert reinforces that fragmentation, separating North Africa from Sub-Saharan Africa for most of history and creating different cultural, linguistic, and political trajectories. The interior of the continent presents even greater complexity. Central Africa's tropical forests, thick and humid, are difficult to traverse and settle. The savannas, while more open, stretch endlessly, separating communities by sheer distance. And regions like the Sahel, caught between desert and grassland, have been historically volatile, vulnerable to drought and conflict. This geography limited the rise of large empires and fostered immense ethnic diversity, an asset culturally but a source of political fragility when European powers arrived. Colonialism compounded these geographic challenges. European nations carved Africa into states with borders drawn arbitrarily, ignoring natural boundaries, trade routes, and ethnic distributions. Dozens of rival groups were forced into single states, while single communities were split across multiple countries. After independence, African nations inherited these borders, creating tensions that governments, often young, under-resourced, and lacking national cohesion, struggled to manage. Geography had already made unity difficult. Colonial boundaries made it nearly impossible. Africa's natural wealth has been a double-edged sword. Vast reserves of oil, gas, gold, diamonds, and rare minerals attract global interest, but have also fueled corruption, civil wars, and foreign interference. When wealth is concentrated in specific regions, like oil in Nigeria or minerals in the Congo, competition for control becomes fierce. Governments must rule enormous territories with limited infrastructure, from deserts to jungles to mountains, making governance expensive and often ineffective. Yet Africa is not defined solely by struggle. Its young population, growing cities, and expanding technological adoption signal enormous potential. Mobile banking, for example, has leapfrogged traditional banking systems and created new economic opportunities. Regional cooperation is slowly improving, and new infrastructure projects are beginning to knit parts of the continent together. But progress must contend with geographic realities: inadequate roads, borders that slice across ethnic lines, and distances that make national integration difficult. Geography does not doom Africa, but it explains why development has been uneven, why stability has been fragile, and why nations here face challenges unlike those elsewhere. When we view Africa through the map, its story becomes clearer: a continent rich in opportunity, yet constrained by natural barriers, striving to overcome a landscape that both nurtures and challenges its people. Chapter 6: The Middle East. To understand the Middle East, you must first understand the geography that has shaped it into one of the most complex and combustible regions on Earth. This is a land of deserts, mountains, narrow coastlines, and strategic choke points, features that have produced ancient civilizations, great empires, and, today, deep political fractures. The map reveals a region caught between continents, rich in resources yet burdened by borders that rarely reflect its cultural or historical realities. Geography here is destiny, and it explains far more than ideology or religion ever could. Much of the Middle East is dominated by harsh desert environments. The Arabian Peninsula, for example, is a vast expanse of sand and heat that historically encouraged tribal societies rather than centralized states. In such conditions, loyalty to tribe outweighed loyalty to nation, and that legacy still shapes political life today. But deserts also act as barriers, separating communities and making large-scale unity difficult. This is one reason why the Middle East is a mosaic of groups: Arab, Persian, Turkish, Kurdish, Sunni, Shia, each shaped by the land they inhabit. The region's geography produced another challenge: the uneven distribution of arable land and water. The Fertile Crescent, from the Nile Delta to Mesopotamia, has always been the exception, capable of supporting dense populations and powerful states. But outside these river valleys, resources are scarce. This scarcity encouraged competition long before oil became the dominant factor. Even today, disputes over water, from the Tigris and Euphrates to the Jordan River, fuel political tensions among neighbors. Beyond the natural landscape, the map also explains modern instability. After the First World War, European powers drew borders that ignored mountains, rivers, and the territories of long-established communities. States such as Iraq and Syria were formed by merging groups who shared little in common except geographic proximity. These artificial borders created nations without natural cohesion, making internal conflict almost inevitable once authoritarian regimes weakened. Oil transformed the Middle East from a crossroads of empires into the center of global attention. Huge reserves lie beneath deserts that had once been dismissed as empty. But the riches are unevenly spread. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, and the Gulf states became energy superpowers, while countries like Jordan or Yemen remained poor. This imbalance deepened rivalries and attracted foreign involvement. Outside powers, first Britain and France, later the United States and Russia, intervened frequently to secure influence and access to energy. As a result, the Middle East became a geopolitical battleground where local disputes quickly escalated into regional or global struggles. The struggles between Sunni and Shia communities cannot be separated from geography either. Iran, protected by the Zagros Mountains, developed a distinct culture and religious identity. To the west, the flatlands of Iraq became a contested space where Shia and Sunni populations mix, making political stability difficult to achieve. These sectarian divides, combined with strategic locations, explain the endurance of conflicts in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Then there is Israel, a small state positioned at the meeting point of Africa and Asia. Surrounded by neighbors who have historically viewed it as an intruder, Israel has had to rely on military superiority and alliances to survive. The narrowness of its territory and the proximity of hostile borders continue to guide its defense strategy. Throughout the region, geography shapes both opportunity and insecurity. Strategic choke points, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb, give enormous leverage to whoever controls them, but also make the region vulnerable to global tensions. Deserts limit settlement but provide oil. Mountains protect nations but divide peoples. River valleys offer life but invite competition. To understand the Middle East is to see that every conflict, every alliance, every bold ambition is rooted in the land itself. The region's geography is not just background, it is the silent force that has shaped its destiny for millennia and continues to steer its future today. Chapter 7: India and Pakistan. To understand India and Pakistan, you must begin with the geography that binds them together and drives them apart. On the map, these two nations sit side by side, sharing a long, tense border shaped not just by politics, but by mountains, rivers, and memories of violence. Their rivalry is not merely ideological or religious, it is rooted in the land itself, in the vulnerabilities and strategic necessities created by the terrain of South Asia. At the heart of their conflict lies Kashmir, a stunning but fiercely contested region perched high in the Himalayas. This is not just a symbolic battleground, it is a gateway. Whoever controls Kashmir controls high ground overlooking the plains below, as well as access to critical water sources that feed both nations. For Pakistan, Kashmir is the unfinished business of partition, a region with a Muslim-majority population they believe rightfully belongs with them. For India, retaining Kashmir is essential to their territorial integrity and national identity as a secular, multi-faith state. Geography here makes compromise extraordinarily difficult. Mountains that should divide instead become flashpoints. India itself is a landscape of extremes. The Himalayas provide a formidable northern wall, shielding the country from invasion for much of its history, while also trapping monsoon rains that feed the fertile Gangetic Plain, home to hundreds of millions. This vast plain has allowed large, centralized states to flourish since ancient times. But beyond the heartland, India's geography becomes more fragmented. Deserts in the west, dense forests in the northeast, and a long, exposed coastline vulnerable to outside powers. These variations have shaped India into a diverse, multilingual civilization that must constantly work to maintain unity. Pakistan's geography offers far less comfort. It is a narrow country running along the Indus River, the backbone of its agriculture, economy, and population. The Indus begins in territory controlled by India, giving Pakistan a deep sense of vulnerability. Water, its most precious resource, flows from across a border it cannot trust. Much of Pakistan's land is arid, forcing reliance on irrigation and making control of the Indus system crucial to national survival. This dependency magnifies every tension with India, turning water into a strategic weapon as much as a natural necessity. The partition of 1947 left both nations scarred. Borders were drawn hastily, splitting communities and triggering one of the largest mass migrations in history. More than 1 million people died, and the trauma solidified mutual suspicion. This legacy weighs heavily on modern politics, making diplomatic breakthroughs rare and fragile. Geography intensifies the hostility. Long stretches of border run through flat terrain, easy to cross and difficult to defend, encouraging both sides to maintain huge armies in constant readiness. Both countries also sit next to China, another giant whose presence complicates the strategic equation. India and China share a high-altitude border where lines are disputed and the terrain nearly uninhabitable. Meanwhile, China's close ties with Pakistan, symbolized by the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, give Islamabad a powerful ally and give Beijing access to the Arabian Sea. India sees this as encirclement, Pakistan sees it as survival. Despite their rivalry, both nations possess enormous potential. India, with its booming population and expanding economy, seeks global influence. Pakistan, despite instability, holds a critical geographic position linking South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. But geography also traps them in a cycle of mistrust. With both sides armed with nuclear weapons, the stakes are uniquely high. To understand India and Pakistan is to understand a region where mountains, rivers, and borders shape every calculation. Their conflict is a product not just of history, but of geography, a powerful, unyielding force that continues to define their future. Chapter 8: Japan and Korea. To understand Japan and Korea, you must begin with the map of Northeast Asia, a tightly packed neighborhood where geography offers little comfort, yet demands discipline, resilience, and strategic clarity. These two nations, though different in culture and history, share a common reality. They exist in the shadow of larger powers, China and Russia to the north and west, and the United States across the Pacific. Their geography forces them to navigate a world where security is never guaranteed and where survival depends on adaptability. Japan is an island nation, shaped more by the sea than by land. Its 4 main islands are mountainous, volcanic, and prone to earthquakes, leaving only a small percentage of land suitable for living and farming. This scarcity taught Japan early that self-sufficiency would always be challenging. The sea protected it from invasion for centuries, allowing unique cultural development. Yet the same sea also isolated it and limited its access to resources. When Japan decided to modernize in the 19th century, it did so with the understanding that industry would require vast imports of raw materials, and that securing those resources meant reaching outward. This geographic vulnerability explains both Japan's imperial past and its modern dependence on maritime trade. Today, Japan's economy depends heavily on global shipping lanes that run through waters increasingly contested by China. Nearly all of its energy supplies arrive by sea. This vulnerability makes Japan deeply attentive to naval power, alliances, and the stability of nearby straits and choke points. The U.S.-Japan alliance, central to Japan's defense strategy since World War II, is not just historical, it is geographic necessity. Japan's leaders know that the island chain they occupy is part of a larger strategic barrier that both protects Japan and complicates China's access to the Pacific. Maintaining that barrier is the heart of their security policy. Korea, meanwhile, occupies a peninsula that has long been a bridge and a battlefield between empires. Its position makes it strategically invaluable but dangerously exposed. Throughout history, Korea has been invaded by China, Japan, and nomadic powers from the north. The peninsula is too close to great powers to escape their attention, yet too small to dominate them. This has cultivated a national instinct for caution, resilience, and rapid adaptation. Modern Korea is divided between North and South, and this division reflects geography as much as ideology. The North is mountainous, offering natural defenses and historical isolation. The South contains more arable land and better access to the sea, making it the natural hub for trade and economic development. After the Korean War, these geographic differences magnified political ones. The North built a militarized, closed regime. The South embraced global trade and economic development. Yet both sides understand that their proximity to China, Russia, and Japan means their fate is tied to decisions made far beyond their borders. South Korea's success is a triumph over geographic limits. With few natural resources, it turned to technology, manufacturing, and global markets. But this success rests on fragile foundations: the threat from the north, the strategic competition between the U.S. and China, and Korea's position along crucial maritime routes. Like Japan, South Korea relies on the stability of sea lanes and on alliances to counterbalance regional giants. Together, Japan and Korea illustrate a powerful truth. Geography does not determine destiny, but it sets the stage on which nations must perform. Both countries have turned limited land and scarce resources into engines of innovation, yet their strategic anxieties remain constant. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, dependent on trade routes they cannot fully control, and located in one of the world's most militarized regions, Japan and Korea must navigate every crisis with a clear understanding of the map beneath them. Their story is one of adaptation in a challenging landscape, nations shaped by mountains, seas, and narrow margins for error, yet determined to thrive despite the constraints geography imposes. Chapter 9. Latin America. To understand Latin America, you must begin with the geography that has shaped both its enormous potential and its enduring struggles. On the map, the region stretches from the deserts of northern Mexico down to the icy winds of Patagonia, from Caribbean islands scattered across warm seas to the towering crest of the Andes. It is a land rich in resources, fertile soils, oil, minerals, forests, and blessed with two great oceans. Yet this same landscape is full of barriers so vast and unforgiving that they have kept communities apart, slowed development, and hindered the rise of a unified regional power. In Latin America, geography is both promise and obstacle. The defining feature of the continent is the Andes, one of the longest and highest mountain chains in the world. Running along the western edge of South America, the Andes divides countries internally and isolates them from one another. Cities like Bogotá, Quito, and La Paz cling to its slopes, but the mountains make roads, railways, and communication extremely difficult. For centuries, these geographic barriers prevented the emergence of strong, centralized states and encouraged local identities instead of national ones. Even today, crossing the Andes can feel like crossing into a different world. To the east lies the Amazon, a vast, dense rainforest covering millions of square kilometers. While rich in biodiversity and resources, it is a natural fortress. Its humidity, insects, dense vegetation, and lack of navigable roads make large-scale settlement and infrastructure immensely challenging. For Brazil, the Amazon has been both a shield and a burden. It protects the country's heartland from invasion, yet makes integration with neighboring nations slow and costly. The rainforest has also prevented most South American countries from easily connecting with one another, reinforcing regional fragmentation. Geography also shaped Latin America's colonial legacy. European powers carved the continent into territories with little regard for natural boundaries or indigenous cultures. Spain and Portugal focused on extracting resources rather than building inclusive institutions. As a result, many modern states inherited borders that made little geographic sense, economies dependent on commodity exports, and societies marked by deep inequality. When independence arrived, countries struggled to build national unity across terrain that naturally pushed people apart. The region's river systems provide another contrast. The Amazon is too isolated, the Orinoco too limited, but the Rio de la Plata Basin, home to Argentina, Uruguay, and parts of Brazil and Paraguay, is the exception. Its flat plains and navigable rivers helped create some of the region's most prosperous and integrated areas. Here, we can see what Latin America might have become with more geography like this: open, connected, and fertile. Yet even in these favorable areas, politics and geography collide. Argentina once stood on the brink of becoming a great global power, but internal divisions and geographic imbalances, wealth concentrated in Buenos Aires, sparsely populated hinterlands, made cohesion difficult. Mexico faces a different challenge. Its proximity to the United States creates both opportunity and vulnerability. The northern deserts divide it internally, while the central plateau and southern mountains complicate governance. Meanwhile, Central America is squeezed onto a narrow isthmus plagued by volcanoes, jungles, and weak infrastructure, making stability elusive. The Caribbean, with its abundance of islands, has always been too fragmented. Its geography invited European empires and later American influence. Small populations and vulnerable economies mean many islands still rely heavily on tourism, remittances, or foreign support. Despite these challenges, Latin America is rich in potential. Its natural resources, youthful population, and expanding urban centers provide opportunities for growth. But transforming potential into power requires overcoming the same geographic barriers that have constrained it for centuries. Roads must cross mountains, forests must be managed without being destroyed, and nations must collaborate across vast distances. When viewed through the map, Latin America's story becomes clear: a region where nature offers abundance but rarely offers ease. Its future will depend on how well it can bridge the divides created by terrain, climate, and history. Divides that have shaped every nation from Mexico to Argentina. The Arctic. To understand the Arctic, you must see it not as a frozen wasteland, but as a rapidly changing frontier that is reshaping global geopolitics. For most of history, the Arctic was simply too cold, too remote, and too hostile to matter much. Thick ice blocked ships year-round, temperatures crippled human activity, and the region remained one of the world's last untouched spaces. But climate change is transforming this once inaccessible zone into a new arena of opportunity and competition. As ice retreats, the Arctic is becoming a place where nations see resources to extract, sea routes to control, and strategic positions to secure. Beneath the melting ice lies a staggering wealth of natural resources. Estimates suggest that a significant share of the world's undiscovered oil and natural gas reserves could be found here, along with rare minerals and vast fisheries. Suddenly, the Arctic is not a distant wilderness, it is a prize. And the countries surrounding it are preparing for what comes next. Russia, Canada, the United States, Norway, and Denmark, via Greenland, all claim territory or influence in the Arctic, and each sees the region through a different strategic lens. Russia is the dominant Arctic power. With its enormous northern coastline, Russia has invested heavily in icebreakers, bases, and infrastructure, far outpacing any other nation. The Northern Sea Route, running along Siberia, is central to Moscow's ambitions. If fully opened by melting ice, it could cut shipping time between Europe and Asia dramatically. For Russia, this route represents both economic potential and strategic leverage. Military bases along the Arctic coast give Moscow control over a region that is becoming increasingly accessible to global traffic. The United States, through Alaska, also has a foothold in the Arctic, though it has been slower to invest in icebreakers and infrastructure. Still, Washington understands that ceding influence here would weaken its global position. The Arctic is a new frontier where the U.S. cannot afford to lag behind, especially as Russia and China show growing interest. Canada's challenge is one of control. Its Arctic coastline is vast but sparsely inhabited, dotted with thousands of islands and waterways that make surveillance and governance difficult. Canada views the Northwest Passage as its internal waterway, but others, including the United States, consider it an international route. This disagreement reflects a broader truth. As the ice melts, questions of sovereignty grow sharper. Greenland, though governed in partnership with Denmark, has newfound importance because of its location and mineral potential. The island sits between North America and Europe, making it strategically vital for military monitoring and air transit. Meanwhile, Norway, with its petroleum-rich Barents Sea region, has quietly become one of the most experienced Arctic nations, balancing resource extraction with environmental stewardship. China, though not an Arctic nation, has labeled itself a near-Arctic state. Its interest is clear: new shipping routes that bypass traditional choke points and access to resources that could fuel its economy. Beijing's scientific stations, investments, and diplomatic efforts show that the Arctic is becoming a global, not merely regional. The melting ice also has global consequences beyond geopolitics. Rising sea levels threaten coastlines far from the Arctic Circle. Changes in ocean currents and weather patterns will reshape climates worldwide. This makes the Arctic not just a strategic space, but a warning of the planet's future. The story of the Arctic is the story of a region awakening. What was once frozen and forgotten is now central to energy security, global shipping, environmental stability, and military strategy. To understand the future of world politics, you must look north, toward a landscape transforming before our eyes, where geography is shifting and with it, the balance of global power. Conclusion. To understand the modern world, you must learn to read the map, not as a simple collection of borders, but as the physical stage upon which every nation acts, struggles, and evolves. Geography is the quiet force that shapes history, politics, and strategy. It does not determine everything, but it sets limits, creates pressures, and offers opportunities that leaders cannot ignore. From the frozen expanses of Russia to the crowded plains of India, from the deserts of the Middle East to the island chains of East Asia, the terrain beneath our fate continually guides the choices nations make. The stories throughout this book reveal a powerful truth. Nations behave the way they do because the land demands it. Russia seeks buffers because it has no natural Western defenses. China strives for unity because its interior is fragmented and historically difficult to govern. The United States projects power globally because its geography has shielded it from invasion and gifted it unmatched internal resources. Africa struggles not because of a lack of potential, but because rivers, deserts, and coastlines divide rather than connect. The Middle East remains volatile largely because its borders ignore mountains, rivers, and ethnic realities. South Asia's tensions endure because the Himalayas divide giants and water binds rivals. Japan and Korea thrive on discipline and technology because their geography leaves little margin for error. Latin America's promise is constrained by mountains and forests that isolate its peoples. And now, even the Arctic, once silent, is entering the global chessboard as ice melts and new routes open. Geography also explains the enduring nature of conflict. Borders drawn without regard for physical or cultural landscapes become fault lines. Mountain ranges protect nations but keep neighbors apart. Rivers bring life but spark competition. Coastlines open doors to trade but expose nations to attack. Every advantage carries a burden. Every disadvantage shapes character. Nations adapt, innovate, and sometimes transcend their geography, but they never truly escape it. Yet, geography is not destiny. Human choices matter. Technology changes what landscapes mean. Diplomacy can bridge divides that mountains cannot. But none of these innovations erase the map. They only alter how we navigate it. The Arctic's melting ice shows that as geography shifts, even slowly, the balance of global power shifts with it. Rising seas, changing climate patterns, and new trade routes are rewriting the strategic possibilities for nations around the world. The lesson is clear. If you want to understand why nations behave as they do, why they fear certain threats, pursue certain ambitions, or cling to certain alliances, you must first understand the geography that shaped them. Maps reveal more than borders. They reveal psychology, opportunity, vulnerability, and memory. The future will bring new technologies, new conflicts, and new alliances, but the fundamentals carved into the earth will remain. Mountains will still stand. Rivers will still flow. Oceans will still define the reach of power. Geography will continue to guide humanity silently but relentlessly, just as it always has. To understand the world and to anticipate what comes next, you must start with the map.